A coup attempt on July 15, 2016 shocked the world. A military faction tried to overthrow the Turkish government, but failed as people across the political spectrum rose up in defiance. We'll look back at that night, exploring what happened, as well as its consequences 6 years on. I'm Andrea Sankey, and this is The Newsmakers. On an unassuming Friday night 6 years ago, Türkiye suddenly faced the prospect of its elected government being overthrown by a rogue faction of its military. In spite of some internal political differences at the time, Turks rose up together that night, many risking their lives to protect their democracy. Hundreds were killed and thousands were injured, but they succeeded in an extraordinary act of defiance against armed soldiers with guns, tanks, and warplanes. In a moment, we'll explore how the coup was quashed and the impact it's had on the country. But first, let's take a look back at that night.
Tanks and soldiers seized Istanbul's bridges. The parliament and presidential palace bombed from the skies. An anchor forced at gunpoint to declare the army was in control. A mutiny had emerged from the shadows and appeared to have won. But Turkey's president sent his own message to the nation.
Milletçe meydanlarda, havalimanında toplanalım ve bunların o azınlık grubu tanklarıyla, toplarıyla gelsinler. Ne yapacaklarsa halka orada yapsınlar.
The tide turned. Thousands of people took to the streets, confronting soldiers face to face. Within hours, they surrendered. Their coup had failed. Many in Turkey feel they owe the country's fate to people like Safiye.
Ben onlarla konuşmaya gittiğimde tek başımaydım.
I was alone when I walked over to have a word with them. I tried to speak to their consciousness as much as I could, but it was for nothing. They started beating me up. When they walked away, they fired towards me from a tank to intimidate me. I was fired up from the moment I heard another lady was injured. That is when I got shot in my right leg, the moment I headed towards her. God gave me an opportunity to tell people my experience. I'm proud of what I lived through because I feel like a victorious survivor.
July 15th was a dark day for Turkey, but it was also celebrated as a victory. This was the country's first and only attempted overthrow that failed.
Turkey has a long and complicated history of military coups d'etats. The army overthrew the government and took power 4 times since 1960.
The difference this time was that a secretive network led by exiled cleric Fethullah Gulen is thought to have been behind the coup. To the state, they're a terrorist network that had embedded itself into the organs of government. But the Turkish military's highest commanders were not involved. But stories of bravery live on. Stories of people like Safiye and the hundreds who lost their lives.
Moving testimony from the people who were there 6 years ago. So how do their experiences and the events of that night affect Türkiye and the world today? Joining me now to discuss that and more are from Krakow, Matthew Bryza. He's a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center and former U.S. ambassador to Azerbaijan. Taha Meli Arvas joins us from Kahramanmaraş. He's an adjunct professor at Bogazici University. And in Istanbul is Tarık Oguzlu. He's a professor of political science and international relations. He specializes in NATO at Istanbul Aydin University. Thanks all so much for being with us. Taha, I need to start with you because the story we just heard there must resonate so strongly in your mind. You were there that night. Take us back briefly, if you can, to how it felt to be part of it on the streets and how you feel today about the impact it had.
Right, that's true, Andrew. It was very surreal when I look back upon it now, even 6 years later. It's very surreal to me. It was, it's all adrenaline after some point. I think what's most poignant for me now, recently, is you may have heard the testimony from, rather the comments from former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, John Bolton, a couple of days ago, in which he says, a few days ago, in which he says he's planned many coups. And he's had a lot of experiences in overthrowing governments. And he's referring to the January 6th insurrection at the U.S. Capitol and how that wasn't a coup. So it's really, it kind of stings to hear someone say from anywhere that they've planned coups, because as a citizen of a country, you vote, you participate in an election, and you believe that means something. So the overthrowing of any democratically elected government, whatever your politics may be, is something that's something so negative. And to me, on that day, on that night, I felt resentment. Really, I felt anger more than anything, and that was the initial emotion that started. So I'll leave it there for now. But that's how it started for me.
But 6 years later, I mean, I'm curious. Do you feel the experience served Turkey and its citizens to a certain end? The unity that was created that night, how is it resonating today?
Right. I think. I mean, the important step or the important precedent that was set was that these type of instances, these military coups, are something that the citizens of Turkey, whatever their politics may be, will not stand for. I disagree with the Turkish government all the time. I disagree with all political parties. I'm an outlier in that case. I'm not a member of any political party, and have very harsh words for all political parties. But that doesn't mean I'm going to support a military coup, whatever that may be. That there are elections in the United States every 2 years that changes the entire U.S. House of Representatives, and in Turkey there are also elections that do the same. So when that time comes, people will vote and choose whoever they choose to. But the unity that was created that night, I think, is one that shows that despite our political affiliations, we are together in solidarity against standing up against military coups. Okay.
Matthew Bryza, there are a lot of suspicions as to what role foreign actors may or may not have played that night. But at the very least, you were a firsthand witness to how the United States responded to what was happening. It really exposed a lack of support and understanding for what the dynamics were in Türkiye. I mean, Washington took arguably far too long to condemn the attempted coup. What do you think today? I mean, has that been forgotten in any way, or did it actually fundamentally change the relationship between the United States and Turkey from that point forward?
I totally agree with you, Andrea. And at the time, I was highly critical of the U.S. government for taking so many days to say what is obvious. As Taha was saying, it is not in the interest of Turkey or the United States or NATO or the civilized world to see a democratically elected government of a NATO ally overthrown through military violence. That should have been said from the very beginning. And I think, that the failure of the U.S. to do that created deep distrust on the side of Turkey, first toward the United States. And as you're suggesting, a lot of people speculated that maybe the U.S. could be behind it. After all, Fethullah Gulen has residency in the United States. I strongly believe the U.S. had absolutely nothing to do with it based on all of my previous experience, but I would understand why people in Turkey would worry about that. And so then what that led to, I think, was President Erdogan deciding that the U.S.'s support is shaky at best. Therefore, maybe Turkey needs to turn toward Russia when it comes to air defense systems, particularly a system like the S-400 that is designed precisely to shoot down U.S. aircraft like the F-16s that were following President Erdogan's plane and were threatening it on the night of the coup.
I mean, that's tragic in itself, is it not? The fact that Turkey couldn't even turn to its own NATO ally for weaponry that it had already been agreed, and that it marks a fundamental actual shift in the global geopolitics and the dynamics that had been at play prior to July 15th.
Yeah, it sure does. I mean, Turkey has NATO's second largest military, right after the United States. Turkey occupies some of the most important ground in the entire NATO alliance. I mean, look what's happening now. It borders Russia and Ukraine across the Black Sea. It borders Syria, as well as Iran and the South Caucasus and Greece. It is such an important piece of strategic real estate. And now the relationship, is quite shaky. I mean, the good news is that for the last 2 years or so, I think President Erdogan has tried to de-escalate tensions with the U.S. and with other NATO allies. But that level of trust, which was already shaken by the second Iraq War, it is even weaker now. And we see that a lot of people in Washington are quote unquote blaming Turkey for looking too much toward Moscow, but at the same time they fail to see how much support Turkey is offering Ukraine at this moment of deepest need.
Right. Tarık, let me turn to you. You know, in some ways, July 15th actually showed Ankara that it needed to be more assertive in what it expected from its Western counterparts, including with NATO, for example. So tell us how you saw that relationship develop over the past 6 years.
I think the picture is so clear to me over the last 5 to 16 years, the kind of psychological chemistry between Turkey and the Western international community has eroded to a significant extent. In the past, we used to see that Turkey and the Western actors sometimes from time to time come to cooperate with each other, sometimes on the basis of common identity, common ideation of values. Turkey used to define itself as a member of the Western international community based on values and norms. But over the last 5 to 6 years, this ideational component of the relationship lost a great degree of its appeal in the eyes of Turkish rulers and elites alike. Rather than that, strategic perspectives, interests, and pragmatic and practical considerations have come to occupy the bilateral relationship. As Meli has already underlined, the degree of resentment and distrust on the part of Turkish rulers against NATO countries have increased to a significant extent. Many people in Turkey have begun asking this question: how come that Turkey, which is a member of NATO since the year of 1952, did not receive any kind of serious support on such a very critically important issue? And not now, when? So after that particular event, Turkish decision makers have increased the efforts to put the idea of strategic autonomy at the very center of Turkish foreign policy understanding and practices. So as part of the strategic autonomy understanding, which is also defined by some other people as Turkey acting as a kind of standalone actor in foreign policy, have very much shaped Turkey's international interactions with other actors as well. So coming closer to Russia has been a part of it, and becoming a much more assertive country in the Middle East, particularly in Syria and Iraq, is another part of it.
Okay, Tarık, I have to be honest, I'm having a great deal of trouble actually hearing you clearly. Hopefully it's easier for our viewers and for our other panelists. But Taha, let me come back to you because I need to ask, I mean, in the aftermath of July 15th, and now 6 years after, are you satisfied with how the perpetrators themselves were actually dealt with, both inside and outside the country?
I think one of the things that citizens like myself have problems with grasping is the speed of justice in general, frankly, and the speed of justice specifically in Turkey. And I mean, frankly, if we're talking about the United States as well, we had this obvious. I mean, you can see the video here. We're watching it as I'm speaking. You know, the bombing of the parliament in Turkey, in Ankara there, and I have yet to feel that satisfied that the people responsible for this have been brought to justice, and that's a problem, because if you don't have justice, you have nothing else. If the United States knows that there are people that funded this coup or helped pull it off, that's as good as firing the bombs and missiles itself. Those are the laws of the United States. If you financially support Al Qaeda or ISIS or whatever, it's just the same as holding a rocket launcher in your hand. So I don't recall anyone being brought to justice in the United States for these actions, for funding it. If there are, please, Ambassador Bryza can help me out. Remember, but I don't recall that being happening. As far as Turkey goes, I know a lot of people were imprisoned or were indicted. Lengthy court cases have been continuing. A lot of people are still serving time, I guess, for those things. But I mean, the ringleaders are the things that are important for me. I mean, the foot soldiers getting imprisoned is one thing, but really the people behind it, I don't think have been brought to justice, unfortunately, and that's a major issue for everyone, including myself.
Right. I mean, you pinpoint the United States here because that's where Fethullah Gulen is still residing. It seems the U.S. has absolutely no intention of extraditing him. The power there probably lies directly at the top of the U.S. government. And is that who you were expecting to take action, but likely won't?
No, I mean,
go ahead.
Listen, since then, we've had three presidents. That was President Obama, and then Trump, and now Biden. And how many, 4 or 5 attorneys general in the United States have changed since that time? I think 4. And so none of them have done anything. I don't recall any of them saying, listen, we won't extradite this person because we believe, your evidence might not be great or whatever, but at least let's do something together where we can potentially see if get a grand jury together, get some type of legal proceedings where a prosecutor, a U.S. attorney can sit down and review and say, yes, we believe these are the actionable items here, or these are the things that occurred, because it's still a crime in the United States to overthrow a government elsewhere. I mean, just because someone isn't an American bribing a foreign official is against the United States laws, is against American laws. An American overthrowing the government of whatever anywhere is still a violation of U.S. laws. Let's forget about the laws of that country who experienced the coup. So just brushing it off and saying we're not going to do anything about it, it leaves a bad taste in your mouth, and it leaves suspicions from other U.S. allies that say, well, what if this happens to us tomorrow? Like, I mean, I don't want to repeat it again, but the John Bolton statement a couple of days ago was really something,
Send chills down your spine. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, who are you actively trying? Which democratically elected government are you actively trying to overthrow now, John Bolton? That's the question you want to ask, and it's saddening. So that's all I can say.
And what about the others seeking refuge in countries right next door? I mean, including Greece. Does it bother you that action hasn't been taken there, or does that pale in comparison to what the United States could potentially do with suspects?
I was in Scandinavia a few years ago, and I recall in the most central squares seeing large posters of United States, European Union recognized terrorist leaders, and people championing them in the square of Stockholm and Copenhagen, etc. And I was like, wow, Scandinavia is supposed to be the bastion of democracy, and how liberal democracy is the most advanced in these countries. And then up until they did really nothing about it, up until very recently, when they had these problems with Russia, and they said, oh, wow, maybe we should join NATO. And suddenly they remembered that they're harboring terrorists and that they're allowing for financial support to go to terrorism. And that's really something. So if we're talking about countries like Greece and other parts of Europe, and it's almost as if we're okay with terrorists as long as they give us an upper hand in other countries. That's a problem.
So, Matthew, maybe you can explain why the United States actually cares seemingly so much about protecting one man, Fethullah Gulen, at the cost of sacrificing a hugely important relationship with a NATO ally.
Well, yeah, I spent 4 years in the White House, and I had the Turkey brief as well as a bunch of other countries. And at that time, there were also requests regarding either Fethullah Gulen's extradition or his request to prolong his residency. And so there's a very narrow group of people, of experts, who've ever even heard of him in the United States, right? I mean, he's enemy number one in Turkey, and he's at best a super obscure person in the U.S. And so inside the government, as I said, there's not much knowledge. Now, the Turkish government did provide those 72 boxes of evidence about the coup. but they weren't in organized fashion. So I think the reaction in the Department of Justice and the National Security Council staff and the FBI was, this feels more like it's just Turkey's asking the U.S. government to go on a fishing expedition and just find something, make a case, and it sure would be better if there could be a collaborative effort together. Now, that did begin. That did happen. I know that there were several visits by members of the Department of Justice and the FBI to Ankara. Discussions ensued. I don't know where they ended up, but Taha makes a really good point. There's been no reporting at all in public about anyone of the organization that is based in the U.S. beyond Fethullah Gulen, but any of the others ever having been seriously investigated, subject to a grand jury or a trial or a conviction. That is odd, and I think what that reflects is, again, the obscurity of the issue for Americans and the skill with which the organization, not just FETÖ, but before that, all the schools and the whole network of Gulen, was able to shape the debate. They're very active in lobbying. They have a lot of money, and they've been able to make the Gulen case look like it's a case of human rights where his rights are somehow violated and he deserves protection somehow in the United States. And so to get from that to seeing that he caused a coup is a big jump, and that hasn't happened.
And it must be frustrating, at least for some Americans who are in the know, and that do understand the very shady role that these Gulenist schools had played in securing money for charter schools from the U.S. taxpayer. They had been convicted in the city of Chicago even for some corrupt dealings. But the knowledge isn't widely enough out there for Americans to genuinely understand that having this network exist in the U.S. doesn't benefit the United States because it helps to compromise a number of their politicians.
It's so totally infuriating, and you're absolutely right. Some of those American politicians got in trouble a few years ago when they took a trip to Azerbaijan that the Gulenists funded. But yeah, it is infuriating. They're breaking all sorts of U.S. federal laws. Okay, the charter schools do a good job in some subjects, but it's operating as an organized and criminal organization, that nobody's paying attention to. And as somebody who, I devoted the first part of my career, hopefully I'll be around a long time, but 23 years to U.S. government supporting U.S. interests. Yeah, it's infuriating that this is happening right beneath everyone's noses, and nobody seems to pay it any attention.
Right. Tarık, I'm going to come back to you. Hopefully your line has been fixed. If you can, tell us a little bit more then about what really has happened to the Gulen network internationally since the night of July 15th, 2016. I mean, the Turkish government did as much as it possibly could to try and break up the network and any of its kind of criminal activity in most countries around the world. How much still remains?
This is an important but an open-ended question. It's not that much easy to say that Turkey has become successful or that successful. It is still an ongoing process. Decision makers have increased their contacts with their external counterparts to make particular claims and demands on them to extradite this Fethullah Gulen and also his close associates to Turkey. Some countries, if I am not mistaken, in the African, some other countries in Caucasia and Central Asia have somehow responded to such kind of Turkish demands cooperatively and extradite a great number of PKK associates to Turkey. But when it comes to Turkey's demand to extradite such kind of people who have resided in Western countries, the jury is out. So the lack of cooperation from the Western actors from this particular sense is quite important because it presents in one or another the dynamic of Turkish-Western relationship. As other commentators have already underlined, Turkey has not expected the kind of cooperation from the Western actors. So there is a lot. There are lots of things to do, but as far as I know, Turkey has proved to be quite successful in the context of Africa, in the context of Caucasia, in the context of the countries lying in the larger Black Sea region and Central Asia. But again, this is an ongoing process. We are not at a particular point to say that Turkey has fully succeeded in this process. We have to wait and see how it evolves in years to come.
Tarık Oguzlu, I will have to give you the final word. completely out of time for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank Taha, Meli, Arvas, and Matthew Bryza as well for joining us, and our viewers, of course, for being with us as always. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.